just waiting for a few more people to come into the meeting, if that's okay with everyone. Excellent. I think we'll start the meeting if everyone's okay. It's 3 minutes past 3. Welcome to this week's press briefing. And we're certainly going to cover some interesting ground today. The way we will do this is as we've done it before. So we will go to Councillor Jonathan Nunn, the leader of Northampton Borough Council, for his view on the local situation as it has unfolded this week. We will then go to Lucy Whiteman, who is the Director of Public Health. We will then open up to questions from the media. And what we'll probably do is wait to both of them have spoken until before we ask any questions. If everyone could mute themselves, that would be very helpful. I'm getting some reverberation across the line. Anyway, I'm going to pass over to Councillor Jonathan Nunn to start off the press conference. Councillor Nunn, over to you, sir.
Yeah, many thanks, Ian, and good afternoon, everyone. As you all now know, we've had a continued increase in the cases in Northampton, as a result of which we have now moved to being classed as an area of intervention. The intervention is not brand new. Following a Cabinet Office visit a couple of weeks ago, we have had significant further support from the government, for which we're grateful. That's involved things such as military planners, supporting our efforts in terms of resources and so on, with their renowned expertise in strategic and tactical planning. But further support such as that will continue. Public Health centrally are providing further support for us through epidemiological support and specialists and so on. So we are already getting a significant amount of additional support, and we'll see that increase. Obviously, a part of the increase in the number of cases has been around the sandwich factory Green Corps. As a result of that, a government decision we've received is that Green Corps are required to close, although they have approached this, if you like, in a voluntary way. Actually, at that point, it's worth saying we continue to believe that what Green Corps have done is to behave very responsibly as a business and as an employer, bringing in their own voluntary testing. They have also made small changes to their organisation, such as removing any attendance factor to their bonus scheme, to remove any disincentive for people to behave responsibly by self-isolating if they felt they had symptoms, and so on. And as we've heard after these press conferences from both public health colleagues and environmental health colleagues, their standards have remained high. Nevertheless, they have volunteered, and the government have asked them to close for a period, which will involve the isolation of some staff, most particularly those who have had symptoms or come into contact with those that have had symptoms. And then over the forthcoming days, a very significant deep clean process will take place, following which hopefully we will be able to authorise, public health and environmental health will be able to authorise a staged reopening. We look more closely at the details behind individual people as they are interviewed, and their habits and their living circumstances are looked at. One of the things has been mentioned has been those that may live in houses of multiple occupancy. There are 16 incidences of this which have emerged, so it continues to be considered as one of the ways in which, in addition to car sharing, using public transport, socialising collectively outside of work, how living in homes of multiple occupancy continues to be one factor which is emerging, with a range of perhaps 2 positive cases, both working at Green Corps and living together, up to, I think the maximum is 4. It's fair to say at this point that we have a significant number of food businesses in Northampton. And as you would imagine, both public health and environmental health remain in extremely close contact with them. Should they be shut down? Was it necessary for Green Corps to shut down? I think that's a question of opinion, really. It's just what has happened. We can give an assurance to everybody that actually the food businesses in Northampton are getting the most intensive support from both public health and environmental health. And we continue to watch them all very carefully, to work and support them to maintain safe workplaces, and to continue to work with them to lobby their staff to behave in a safe way, not leave their COVID behaviours at the door, and then start car sharing and using public transport and so on. Are we near a lockdown? We are grateful for the government, who may have interpreted the need to put us into lockdown and haven't. We are, as I say, an area of intervention. But to the residents of Northampton, to workers and residents and so on, I would say we absolutely need to, as we said before, keep our foot on the gas. All of the precautions we should continue to take. That's the basic fundamental government ones of hand washing and so on. The additional things that we've asked people to do, such as not to car share and to absolutely avoid public transport if you can. If you do have to use public transport, adopt the approach of no mask, no ride. In other words, that mask should be on from when you join the queue, from when you enter the bus, throughout the journey, when you leave, until you're beyond the bus and into an open space. And in any confined space, you must wear your mask. We're asking people not to mix with other households or outside of their own bubble, and not to share objects and things and so on. And our hope still is that we can remain out of that lockdown if we can continue as a collective, us as residents of Northampton, to adhere to all of these precautions and guidelines. I think that's a summary, Ian, of where we are. In due course, be very happy to take any questions, of course. Thank you,
Jonathan. And of course, the other key message is testing. If you show any signs of any symptoms, get tested and isolate, and isolate in accordance with the guidance as well. But other than that, of course, you're very correct in everything you say there, Jonathan. Lucy Whiteman, over to you to explain the situation as you see it from a public health perspective. Lucy.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. So, as we do, we're summarising everything from a point of view of our weekly data release. What we've been doing, obviously, as you know, is putting this information into the public domain. Apologies, I think we've got some reverberation in the background.
Have a little bit, sorry.
Thank you, I think that's being sorted out.
Apologies. You're now muted again. Sorry, Lucy.
I know, it's just coming off of that.
Yeah.
So, as of the 16th of August, there were 4,080 positive cases in Northamptonshire. And of those, 334 were identified in the week between the 10th and the 16th of August. Now, rather unusually, a lot of those were actually identified through Pillar 1. So Pillar 1 testing, as you know, is usually just for those people who are in high-risk areas, i.e. the hospital, or who are working in high-risk clinical areas. So because Greencall undertook private testing, that was allocated to Pillar 1, just because that's the route through which those tests were processed. So there is a slight anomaly in how that's been reported, and I wanted to make sure people understood why that particular pillar of testing had increased so. Through Pillar 2 testing, we saw 126 cases in that last week, and some of those were those Greencall employees who had gone through the normal Pillar 2 processes, so had sought testing through some of our local testing sites and our mobile testing units. So as we know, the overall case incidence has been increasing for the last 6 weeks across Northampton. Obviously, that had started to look better from the point of view of the rate of testing, and the rate of positivity had been declining. However, there's been a significant uptick in the number of cases, which has obviously influenced our overall incidence following that significant private testing that was undertaken through Greencall. That's obviously reflected in the information on slide 8, which always talks about both the gender split, but also the split from a point of view of age ranges. Again, please note that that is being done on Pillar 1. So total cases by borough and district. So Northamptonshire, for the first time, you'll see, has obviously ended up being a statistically significantly higher rate compared to the England average. Now, this is the first time it's happened at a county level. Obviously, in part, this is driven by what's happened at Greencall, but we do need to recognise that there are still a number of cases arising in all of our boroughs and districts. So slide 9 summarises that we've seen an increase in Daventry as well as an increase in Northampton. And people will remember from last week, some of those initial tests through Pillar 2 also had affected the Wellingborough rate. So people can see that the numbers are small in other boroughs and districts, and that the concentration of cases for this week has been in Northampton. From a point of view of our rates in each area, we still have a cumulatively, statistically significantly higher rate in both Kettering and Northampton. So we continue to implore people, as Councillor Nunn has just reiterated, to maintain all of those safe practices around social distancing, hand washing, and obviously not socialising outside of your family unit or your support bubble wherever possible. In order to make sure that we maintain the improved position in Corby and the improving position in Wellingborough, we still implore all of the residents there to do the same. Slide 11 always provides our cumulative rate by different areas, and you can see a significant uptick in Northampton there. So from a point of view of some of our more recent data, the rate of confirmed cases on page 12 of our summary, as I said, provides us with a picture over time and compares to both the England and the Northamptonshire average. Obviously, as I said, our Northamptonshire average has been significantly influenced by the fact that Northampton as a borough's rate has increased, and therefore the comparison obviously starts to be quite challenging in other areas. So key to our data pack this week are the rates that we've talked about previously, so the the case rates in the last 28 days. So the cumulative cases in the last 28 days, you will see a significant uptick on page 15 in Moulton. Now, this is not because everybody at the moment lives in Moulton that is a positive case. It's because those Pillar 1 tests were all allocated to the Moulton ward because that's where Greencore is located. So it's just worth noting that we have all of the information behind the scenes and have mapped all of these cases through Greencore. But from a point of view of the reporting through the national processes, they've all been allocated to the Greencore industrial address and not the individual residents' addresses. I can confirm that those residents are focused mainly in the centre of town in Northampton, so the Thorpelands and Round Spinney area, Town and Semilong, Blackthorn and Ling. So all of the areas that we've seen high cases actually previously, very much still aligned with Greencore employees, and Victoria and Icebrook remain the focus from a point of view of Wellingborough. So the patterns from a point of view of previous case rates are actually very similar. And so I just want to make sure that people recognise it's not a significant issue in the Moulton ward itself, but more an allocation of cases to that industrial address. As we know, we're now including all of the outbreak information. So slide 17 gives a summary of where all of our current outbreaks are. 11 of which are in care homes, 2 in hospitals or hospices, of obviously interest at the moment as well. We've also got 3 in workplaces, one of which obviously is Greencore. We obviously, as Councillor Nunn's already outlined, are continuing to undertake a significant amount of activity, both in relation to communications and engagement, but also ongoing enforcement, not just of our messages, and with making sure that people are compliant with things like social isolation requirements, but also in relation to supporting our businesses to operate in a safe way. And we continue to also reinforce the fact that Greencore has been exemplary in their practices. And the decision here, as I said before, is not based on the fact that there is a concern within the factory or the standards itself, but it is in order to ensure that we're able to provide assurance to the public that that deep clean has occurred. And obviously the isolation of the employees themselves is key here from the point of view of the Secretary of State's decision to eliminate any risk. Happy to take questions, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much. I've got a number of participants that want to ask questions. I've had Sarah Ward actually has asked a couple, but she can't get online because her microphone's not working. So I'm going to ask those in a second when I find them. But in the meantime, I've got Neil Barber from ITV Anglia who wants to ask some questions. Neil, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ian. Lucy, can I just check on the number of cases identified in the second round of testing of Greencore staff? Can you put a number on that? And also, Jonathan, initially, because I want to follow up on this, was the Greencore factory ordered to close, or did they volunteer to close?
So thank you for your question. The first round of testing, as you know, we initially had 293 cases. There were some duplicates there, so by the time those were removed, we actually had a confirmed number of 287 cases. The retesting of the negatives from the first tranche is actually still ongoing, so we're still awaiting those final results.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for that answer. Neil, did you have a subsequent question, or
Yeah,
you have? I'm just going to bring Jonathan Nunn in on that question, and then I'll come back to you, Neil, if I may. Councillor Nunn, over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. My understanding, Neil, is that Green Corps have complied or almost volunteered for anything that people have wanted them to do, so be it public health, environmental health, or indeed government. So that's the voluntary aspect. The actual fact that it will close is a government directive. I think I've got that right. Looking to Lucy to nod, I think. So no,
he would have obviously imposed that directive, but actually Green Corps had already voluntarily offered to close they were very clear, should the Secretary of State feel that was necessary, they would do that voluntarily, which is the case.
Thank you very much. Neil, back to you. Did you have a subsequent question, or were you happy with that? Yeah, go for it, Neil. Thank you.
Yeah, so now obviously we know that the Green Corps factory is closing, and people will be told to self-isolate for 2 weeks to try and stem the outbreak. Isn't it the case that if this had been done 2 weeks ago, you might not be in the same situation that you are now? And do you leave yourself open to potentially putting profit before people in allowing people to continue working in a dangerous environment for 2 weeks when they shouldn't have been?
Lucy, did you want to take that one? Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Neil.
More than happy to answer. So no, at any one time, we were fully conversing with Green Corps, with Environmental Health, with Public Health England, specialist virologists and field epidemiologists. And at no point was it felt necessary for everybody to undertake a 14-day isolation period. Obviously, this is off the back of the fact that Green Corps invested significantly from a point of view of resource and finance in private testing. So their number one important factor has been the well-being of their staff. So no, we went through that process. Admittedly, we found more cases than we had anticipated, and all of those people and their household contacts have been self-isolating. So this is a step that the Secretary of State feels is necessary, but from a point of view of the epidemiology and as I said, the environment, where Green Corps have demonstrated significantly higher levels of compliance than required, there was no requirement from our perspective to do it.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for that. I've got a number of other people asking questions. I have got some questions, written questions. Sarah Ward did ask a couple of written questions, but unfortunately on the Zoom group chat, I can't scroll back up, unfortunately, so I can't see them. But if you would like to ask them again on the group chat, yes, there we are. Okay, so Sarah, I'm going to come to you first, and I'm going to read out the questions. So there's 2 questions. The first one is, Green Corps' outbreak was only picked up after private testing by the company, with many workers being asymptomatic. How can you be sure the rising figures in Wellingborough, Corby and Kettering are not linked to as yet undetected similar large outbreaks in other firms? And I'll read the second question because they're sort of interlinked. Would it not be reasonable to ask all food processing firms in North Hampshire to carry out private testing of staff? Thank you for that question, Sarah. Over to you, Lucy.
So it's actually slightly factually incorrect. The outbreak was not picked up by private testing. We'd been engaging with Green Corps, as I outlined in our press conference last week, for around 8 to 10 days prior to the test results of the private testing coming back. And actually the cases had initially been picked up through that Pillar 2 testing, as I talked about a couple of minutes ago. Particularly, the importance here is the fact that where we are obviously able to utilise government-led testing regimes, they do take some time to put in place. So we were exploring that option when Green Corps, as I said, volunteered to pay for private testing, which can be mobilised a lot faster, very much so with their staff and employee well-being in mind. So it's not factually correct that it was picked up through the private testing. We were already aware of it, and we're already working with Public Health England colleagues and Green Corps to address that. They simply, as I said, enhanced and quickened our ability to get the rest of the work course tested. And therefore, it wouldn't be reasonable to ask all of food processing firms in Northampton to undertake this. It is extraordinarily expensive and also would be disproportionate. Quite a lot of these organisations, as we've talked about, are demonstrating really high levels of compliance within the workplace. And we're finding with many of our outbreaks, not just in food preparation or industrial estate areas, that the outbreaks are being driven by behaviours outside of the workplace. So despite the best efforts of Green Corps and other organisations where we've found similar outbreaks, when we've actually done the very detailed sort of questionnaires, etc., with cases, we've found that actually their contact with a previous case, or indeed their likely exposure, usually happens outside of the workplace. So even so, it's very difficult to ensure that we would pick things up through workplace testing. What this is about is reinforcing those messages that we had at the beginning about not leaving COVID secure practices at the door when you leave your workplace, but utilising all of those social distancing, hand washing, and sort of maintaining your household or social bubble are the key to stopping the onward spread.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Lucy. Very good answer. I've got a number of other people lined up. So I've got Laura Coffey from BBC Radio Northampton. Hello, Laura, are you there? Hi, Laura. I'll come back to you, Laura, if I may. I've got one other written question. It's from Nadia, again at BBC Look East. Can I ask why now and not when the outbreak was first identified to close the factory? The audio isn't working. I think you've already answered that, if I'm honest, but would you like to answer it again? Because I think it's a very good point that we need to keep reiterating, particularly around how Green Corps have behaved impeccably throughout this whole process. Over to you, Lucy.
All of the evidence that we have, as you quite rightly say, Councillor Morris, that we've already talked about, the view of the virologists, Public Health England and ourselves is that the setting is not the risk factor here. Obviously the Secretary of State has decided to take that step, but from the evidence that we provided to him, the view is very much that that's not the risk factor. As I said, they will be undertaking a deep clean process and we hope to support them to be operational as soon as possible once that's been completed.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'm going to see if Laura Coffey, are you back? Are you online yet?
Hi, Councillor.
Hi, Laura. I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay. No, it was my end, I think.
Feel free to ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So, firstly, what has changed then in the last week since the last conference to mean that Green Corps is now closing today? Also, do you know how many people will be self-isolating? We've heard that all employees and their direct households, how many people will that be who will be self-isolating? And does it mean that everyone who lives in the HMOs will have to self-isolate as well? How will this be enforced? And what about the workers who don't live in Northamptonshire? How will the self-isolation be enforced for them?
Thank you, Laura. I think this is probably a two-part answer. I'm going to go to Lucy first, and then Jonathan, you may want to comment on that question as well, because HMOs are of particular concern, I believe, for the borough and for all of us. Lucy, shall I come to you first, and then I'll come to Jonathan, if I may?
Absolutely. So Green Corps are in the process of confirming how many people this will impact. Understandably, employers don't have details of everybody that lives within a household, so that information is being collated at the moment. So I'm not able to give you an exact number. We do know that Green Corps employ overall just over 2,000 people, so we are talking about significant numbers here. But there are some nuances to the requirement to self-isolate. Obviously, those that have already been self-isolating, because they're either a case that's been identified through the tier 1 or 2 tier 2 testing previously, or a household contact of those, will already have been self-isolating, and there is no requirement for them to restart that. So there are some nuances to this. From a point of view of why now, it is a decision that the Secretary of State has taken. So from our perspective, that is the change. And those people from outside of Northamptonshire, again, we're in the process of collating that information so that we can understand how that can be processed and obviously what the enforcement requirements around that would be.
Thank you, Lucy. Jonathan Nunn, did you want to come in on that point on HMOs particularly, or the whole question? Over to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I'm not sure there's much to add, other than, as we said, there was believed from Green Corps to be identified 16 HMOs with a range of between 2 and 4 people working and living there who had tested positive. And yes, those households will have to self-isolate. It is, of course, across industrial environments, perhaps a profile that there are many people who are living in more shared or denser accommodation. Possibly the only thing to add, which I wish I'd mentioned earlier, is a part of the strategy, is we're looking to make testing really readily available in industrial areas such as Bracknells and Grange Park as well. And that work is ongoing, which means that if people have a feeling that they ought to be tested, or they have a concern, if we can make it easier by putting the testing on their doorstep near their workplace, well, then we're looking to do that. So we hope to have some firm news on that in the next day or two. I think that's probably all I can add, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunn. And it is important to note that we are constantly looking at expanding our testing capabilities as well, in terms of the mobile units and various other options which would allow us to put units in at Bracknells and places like that, as you mentioned them, Jonathan, although I don't signal that Bracknells is an area of concern, but that was just because you gave it as an example. Thank you very much. Alistair from the Chronicle and Echo. Hello, sir.
Can you hear me?
Just about.
Yeah, sorry, I'll come closer. Is that better?
Bit better.
Yeah, I'll shout anyway. Lucy, you were saying that just then that is a decision by the Secretary of State. I'm assuming you mean Hancock. What regard has he made a decision on? Was that the decision to go in for Green Corps to go into a voluntary self-isolation, or was it his decision to put us into this new state, I suppose? What decision has he made?
Thank you for your question. Lucy.
So there is a statement on the Department of Health and Social Care website with regards to his decisions. He was minded to close Green Corps should they not have done so voluntarily. As I said, I can't reinforce the fact more that they did, absolutely, despite evidence that we were able to collate about the standards that they had maintained. He felt it a necessary step, and so they voluntarily did so. His second decision was the enforcement of a 14-day self-isolation period for all of the employees, as I said, minus a couple of caveats and their household contacts. So those were the Secretary of State's decisions at this point in time.
Thank you, Lucy. So Alistair, yeah, sure, go for it, Alistair, if we can hear you.
As of this morning, there was a new testing site set up at Grange Park. This morning, Malton Park was taken off the list of places in Northamptonshire you could get tested, but Grange Park was added where it wasn't last night. This is new today, as I can tell. What's led to this decision to set up the testing centre in Grange Park?
Lucy.
So as Councillor Nunn alluded to, we've recognised that obviously our industrial estates, our factories, our food processing sites are higher risk situations or environments, and therefore, as Councillor Nunn said, we want to make sure that that testing is available. It's very difficult for people who work shifts to be able to travel into the centre of Northampton, where we've got that local testing site. And as we have done since the beginning of the pandemic, we rotate those mobile testing units around. Clearly, where we've identified that there are similar behaviours, similar cohorts, similar environments in other industrial estates, we will rotate that mobile testing unit around those different industrial estates. So you'll, in a couple of days' time, see it move on to another.
Thank you for that, Lucy. And of course, our efforts to improve a local track and trace system as we go forward is going to have an enormous effect on bringing those numbers under control elsewhere as well. I've got Matt Precy from BBC Look East. Matt, are you there, sir?
I am. Hello. Is it the case that a number of Green Corps workers have been moonlighting elsewhere in Northampton, which is to say they've been working at other places? And if that's the case, do you know what proportion of Green Corps workers have been doing this? And have you taken any other measures in these particular settings as a result of this knowledge? And indeed, the two other workplaces you mentioned where there have been outbreaks, are these settings places where Green Corps workers have been moonlighting as well?
Lucy, is that one you want to take? Although I should think that's a rather difficult question to answer, but I'm sure you'll do your best. Lucy.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I can answer it as best as I can. So when I would refrain from using the word moonlighting. Obviously, people are able to, unless they have exclusive contracts, work in different places. So there is one element of that, and we recognise that these workers do tend to work in areas where there are low wages, and so sometimes that is absolutely a requirement for their lifestyle and for them to be able to pay for everything that they need to do. So that aside, there is nothing wrong with that. What we have recognised, obviously, is that there can be people who work for one or more organisation. We have found some links between workplace settings, but that has happened, for example, with nurses who work into hospitals. So this is not unique to this industrial estate workers or food processing factories at all. It's a known challenge where people have more than one job. And we have written to agencies, and that letter will be going out today, to ask people not to be double placed for the time being, and that if people require further shifts, that we obviously try to seek for those to be facilitated within one workplace setting to reduce the risk of any cross-contamination where people may be identified as a case.
Thank you, Lucy. Matt, did you have a subsequent question?
I'd just like to ask the two other workplaces where there have been outbreaks, is there evidence that those settings are places where Green Corps workers have been holding down additional jobs?
I think you may have already asked that question, but Lucy, would you?
I didn't get an answer to it, though.
No, but I think Lucy did her best to answer that question. Lucy, did you want to comment again? Over to you, Lucy.
I've got nothing to add.
No. Okay, we'll move on. Thank you, Matt. I've got Jack Duggan from the Chronicle and Echo, please. Jack, sorry, are you there, sir?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Great. So I just wanted to ask, now that Northampton's been made an area of intervention, is there going to be any more intervention from the government like we've seen in other places? How likely that might be, and what those measures might be, if you know.
Lucy, did you want to answer that one? I mean, the simple answer to the question is yes, if we don't get the numbers down. But Jonathan, did you want to come in on that one, actually? Councillor Nunn.
Well, only briefly, because I've made inquiries of this of our public health colleagues, and am aware that the likely review of this again will be on each Thursday or Friday morning, but nevertheless that there are a variety of different forms of lockdown that could be imposed, and I do know that in the meantime public health have the powers to enforce other types of behaviour change should they need to between those reviews. So it is very much a sort of moving feast, and all of us want public health to react however they need to, whether indeed that has to be enforcement. We're trying to avoid every possible restriction on people's lifestyles and restrictions on people's businesses, and therefore risk of their jobs. But there are a variety of other measures that could be introduced, and on a day-to-day basis would be considered. I think that's fair to say, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunn. That's very fair to say, and obviously it's incumbent upon all of us to follow the guidance and testing rules and everything else in order to get this under control, so that we don't have to go into further measures. I've got a written question here, which I'm going to read out, which came, just apologies, we had some questions written and had submitted in advance. I think we've dealt with a large number of them, but I do have one here that I would like to read out, if that's possible. And it's from Kate Cronin at the Northants Telegraph. Wellingborough in particular, but also Kettering and Corby, are experiencing spikes in cases that mirror those in Northampton. Can a significant number of those cases in the north of the county be traced back to Green Corps via workers who are travelling there from outside the area? I think you've probably already answered this to a degree, but I don't think it matters to reiterate the answer. Lucy, over to you.
So absolutely happy to confirm, about 85% of employees at Green Corps actually live in Northampton Borough. The second largest area where we have people residing who work at Greencore is Wellingborough. So again, you will have seen that reflected, as I mentioned at the beginning, in last week's and this week's data to an extent. There are a handful. I mean, it is very few employees actually that live elsewhere within our county, and even fewer that live out of area. So it is a small impact, and that's why one of the things that we really need to emphasise on this press conference is, although I appreciate the focus on Greencore because of the Secretary of State's decisions, there is still a fight that we are fighting around COVID across the wider county. Greencore clearly has significantly influenced our figures, but Northampton was already on the watch list, and we need to make sure that we continue with all of the good practice that had started, and that we continue to push the numbers through testing so that we can identify where these cases are and make sure we break that onward chain of transmission through self-isolation.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I have another written question from Jonathan at Northants Live. The first one I'm going to read out. What terms will workers at Greencore be on? Will they be forced to take statutory sick pay? And the second question is, can the details of what virologists found at Greencore be made public? Again, I think you've largely answered this already, Lucy, but and then Jonathan may want to come in on this. Jonathan, did you want to come in on this one, or Lucy first, then Jonathan, whichever way around? Jonathan, I'll come to you first, then go to Jonathan.
Yeah, probably so much of this is focused on Lucy. I may be able to make some contribution to the first part of that question. The second may play more to her expertise. Our understanding is that in actual fact there aren't 0 hours contracts at Greencore, and that people are on a more traditional employed, fully paid type contract, which means that people will still have the basic money they need to survive. We're very much aware that with many organisations, if you recently joined, you may fall back on statutory sick pay. So we're working with Greencore to ensure that everybody has the basics they need in order to be able to pay the rent and cover the food bill. Quite clearly, and coming back to some of the earlier questions made, if somebody's forced to be off work with far less money than they need just to survive, the possibility of taking another job or casual cash work on a building site or whatever it might be will be a very strong, almost a necessity rather than just a temptation. So that is an area we're looking at very, very carefully to ensure that people do have the, if you like, the wherewithal to self-isolate should they need to, and not be forced to, well, I don't know, move out of county to get off the radar and start earning money somewhere else. I think that's the first part of that question.
Thank you, Councillor Nunn. And of course, it's worth reiterating, and I'm sure Lucy's going to do this in a minute, that this isn't a closure forever. This is a short-term closure, which should have a minimal, hopefully a minimal impact on employment at the site. Lucy, did you want to comment? Lucy?
From a point of view of the virologist's findings, the outbreak control meeting notes and minutes, as I'm sure you can appreciate, because we talk about individual cases, we couldn't share, just simply because there are protected personal details within them. I'm quite happy from a point of view to see if we can get a statement from Public Health England, if that would help, around the standards that they found, and clearly if they would have the ability to state any concerns, should they have had any, around any of the compliance or their findings in Greencore.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much for that full answer as always. Laura Coffey, your hand is still up. I'm presuming that's from earlier. Laura, are you there?
Hi, yes, I am. No, there was an additional question.
Oh,
that I
well,
just
thank you for being so patient then. I do apologise. I should have asked you at the time. Carry on, Laura.
Lucy, this is to you. You spoke to us yesterday on our Drive programme. You spoke to Wayne, and you mentioned that there have been some concern from businesses around the test centre in Market Square in Northampton, that they were unable to open because of the closure. You said that people coming into around 300 people are coming in to get tested, and you hope that they would then go to the local facilities. Isn't this against the very guidance you've been putting out, telling people to work from home, the local guidance that is in place for Northampton, to work from home, to stay indoors, to not mix? Listeners had questioned whether that just kind of really went against the guidance you've been putting out.
Thank you, Laura. Lucy?
So no, I can appreciate that people may have misinterpreted it, but actually what I said was that people would be able to shop safely. So even when we're asking people to restrict what they do. It's clear, and we've always been clear, that people will have to go out for essential. So this is about people restricting non-essential travel and shopping. If they are going to get testing, that's clearly essential. If they're going to get shopping immediately in the vicinity of the market square, again, that would be for essentials. So I would hope it wasn't confusing, but just in case it was, there's the clarity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lucy. I've got Matt Precy. Your hand is still up. Did you have a subsequent question, or was that from earlier, Matt, from BBC Look East? Matt?
I don't.
No. Thank you very much. That's the best sort of question. Thank you, Matt. And Jack Duggan from the Chronicle and Echo, your hand is still up. I'm going to assume that that's the same case, but it might not be, Jack.
No, I've got another question. I put it in the chat, but I can ask it.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yes, you did put it in the chat, but yes, feel free to ask it.
Yeah, it's just wondering if the changes and from the government and the increase in cases are going to have any effect on schools reopening in 2 weeks' time. If you have any sort of information about that, that'd be great.
Lucy, did you want to take that one? I mean, I think it's very unlikely to affect the schools, but I'll pass over to Lucy's greater knowledge on that. Lucy.
Obviously, because we've seen and we've talked about on a week-to-week basis, the situation changes so rapidly that obviously we would be reassessing that risk as and when we get to a point where we're able to. At the moment, I would suggest not, but as I said, we need to reinforce those messages that we're not in the clear. Green Corps aside, although our rates have reduced, we still need people to adhere to those restrictions in order to make sure that the trend continues in the right way for the underlying Northamptonshire rate. So again, we would be risk assessing that closer to the time, but we're already in conversation with universities, colleges and schools with that regard.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Matt, your hand is still up, but that was probably still a mistake. So we'll assume that you've answered.
Well, I do actually have a.
Oh, you do now. Excellent.
I'm not sure that Lucy can really answer this, but I've heard from a source that the enforcement is going to be a lot stricter now than what it was during the lockdown a few months ago. Less warnings and more on the spot fines and what have you. Can you comment on that at all?
Lucy, can you comment on that?
I would prefer for that to be actually deferred. I don't know if we've got a police colleague on the line. I'm not sure if we do, but obviously enforcement from a point of view of fines, etc., is actually more their field than mine. Obviously, we would encourage people to be compliant and not have to go to that extent. But I certainly know that it's something that we would support should we find that there is a high level of non-compliance. But I'm not sure if we have a colleague on the line who may wish to add to that.
I don't think we do. Councillor Nunn, I suspect.
Sorry.
We do.
Sorry. Oh, hello. Hi.
Hello. Sorry. Apologies. I came in late. Simon Blatchley, Assistant Chief Constable.
Oh, hi. Sorry. I didn't realise you're 007 or something on here.
Yes, that's my collar number.
Anyway, carry on, sir.
Thank you, Ken. Now, just on that one, we're waiting for any new government legislation that comes out as a result of the press release that's been made today. Our intention would be to do exactly what we did during the high point of Taller, March, April, May, whereby hoping to engage, educate with the public and enforcement being the last resort. So we're waiting for any additional powers that the government may or may not pass down. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. That's very helpful. Jonathan, did you want to come in on that? Or, Jonathan Nunn?
No, that was a far more authoritative answer than anything I might have said. Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for that input. I'm just looking around the room to see if there are any further questions. It doesn't look as though there are. So if everyone's happy, I think we will close the... Jonathan, did you want to say something? Sorry.
I was just quickly going to pick up on something. Matt's question, I forget the question specifically, something occurred to me and which I chipped in to say it. It was around the area of car sharing, I think. I hope colleagues will forgive me. I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn, but car sharing is an issue, not just amongst the same workplace, but, and this links to what you said, Matt, there's some evidence of a link of car sharing between Green Corps and one of the other outbreaks that's on a different industrial area, but is of a much smaller scale. So some of this problem is not just 4 people from one factory jumping into a car. There are these links that are being traced, but the assurance is that every single one of them is being traced to make sure that efforts, testing and everything else go into where these links may turn into further outbreaks or infections.
Thank you, Matt, were you talking there? I do apologise.
Just saying, yeah, thanks,
Oh,
Jonathan.
thank you. At which point, I think that is the final question. I'm just checking online to see if there's any more. Thank you very much, everyone who's attended today. Thank you for all your time. Can I say stay safe out there? Let's all follow the guidance and the new rules, and we will find that we won't be going into lockdown, hopefully, in a few weeks' time. Thank you very much, everyone. See you this same time, same place next week. Goodbye.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Ian. Bye.